Hello there, this is Oliver Dillon-Stout. Right now we are looking at Module 3 Classic Arcade assignment. This is for SGD 213 and one moment, I forgot the N dash, um, N885. Okay, so we've got spongy, some grimes, and some acid. We've also got our background that's going to be assisting us with keeping the boundaries of spongy. I can go ahead and do a quick playthrough, and then we can go over all the information in each script and what's adjustable. You'll notice over here, um, we've got adjustable written in a few spots, and that is going to assist us with just organizing this, and so you can see what we've taken note of so that you can follow along more easily. So let's do a quick playthrough. We've got the A and the D key, which is set up to help us move left and right. We are dodging the slime or the acids. We are collecting the grimes, as a good sponge would do. I got a pretty high score with this, so I'm actually going to do a little kamikaze work here. As you can see, we've got lives going down, score going up, and so on. We've got time being recorded in the top left corner. All right, so let's go through some of the script to see how that's working. So first and foremost, we will be calling the public class Spongy, and this is a mono behavior script. We've got public float speed set to 3. The F at the end of 3 is related to the float sort of information. This number is adjustable. If I were to go through and change this, I would suggest doing it on here. If we were to go to Spongy and his script, you'll see his speed also there, but if we want to do it long term for all users, we would do it in the script. So I'll change that to 6 just for more fun. We're gonna maybe change most of these to a higher uh, level of intensity for the game player as we go through this. Alright, so we've also got public GUI style, my style, that's eventually going to be calling out my style. You'll see that pop up later on as we go through this script. Alright, and then we've got private int for the integer variable. We are going to name it lives, and we're going to give our character 3 lives. I will keep this the same. Again, this is also adjustable. If we want to have fewer lives, you know what? We're going to change things. Since we're going to make it harder, we'll give ourselves more tries. So then public int score, since this is going to start as soon as the game starts, we're going to start with a score of 0. That's going to be just the way that you would normally structure a game play similar to this. So we'll leave that as is. Again, that could be adjusted if you wanted it to be. Okay. Um, Now we need to track how long you are going to be surviving, and we are going to display it to the user with the time in the top left corner. The time is also going to, I believe, track some of our score points. So that is done in private integer named minutes, and right here we are just declaring variables. The other one is private integer variable name seconds. Then we state a private float, which is side limit. This is going to relate to the background. We are going to utilize the width of the sprite, and we are also going to make sure that if the sprite in a following if statement later on goes beyond certain boundaries, that it will eventually be multiplied by 0. So the speed and the half width of the sprite times 0 is just going to keep it locked in place so it cannot go out of the bounds. But we need to do that later on in the script. We'll get to that in a bit. Alright, so we've got private game object BG reference. That's going to help us reference the game object background. We've also got the renderer, and this will locate the background image and then render the background image. We've got the private game object objects and this bracket here is going to be an array. Here we are just stating it, or declaring it. It's better vocab. Then we've got the private render spongy rend and private float spongy half width. That's the half width I was referring to earlier. So we're going to render spongy's location using the sprite object spongy, and it's going to calculate half of the width of the sprite. Alright, so we move on to void start. We've got spongy rend equals game object dot get component renderer. So that is going to basically find the component renderer and store its location. So that's going to relate, let me see here. Yeah, that'll relate to the sprite spongy. Let me see here. I'm just going to scroll down. This helps me keep track visually between my notes and this. Alright, so we've also got spongy half width equals spongy rend dot bounds dot size, and we're dividing it by 2. Again, that's the half width because it's going to be half the width of this little spongy sprite. Alright, and next we need to find the game object bathroom. We're going to be typecasting it, and it will store it then as a game object, which is what this is right here at the end. So background renderer equals background reference get component renderer. We are finding a component named, or which is the renderer, and storing the renderer into the background renderer right here. Then we want to calculate the size of the background. So that's going to be side limit equals background renderer dot bounds, and then the size, and divide it by 2 in the end. Alright, so we then have void move update, and then move character, and this is a call to our function, and that is pretty much where that's going to call the move character function later on once we have, I believe it's, let me see, well, it's going to be further down along here actually, so one moment. Okay, so we now have private void move character. So this is where we're going to create hotkeys. The hotkey does not have to be A. Let's say we want to change it to Q and E. I believe I could do just this and repeat for down here. But if we're going to do that, we have to make sure anywhere else in here that it's not asking for that specific letter, or else it will not work. But I do believe this will work in this case. We will find out shortly. I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick, just since we've made a few adjustments. And as we continue on, we are still only in the spongy section. I will try to speed this up a little bit for us. So essentially in the private void move character, we are setting up the hotkeys and setting it from left to right. We have side limit times -1, and this references the spongy object, and setting the limitations clearly for that. And as long as spongy's position is greater than the side limit times -1 spongy's plus spongy's half width, we allow it to move left if it is greater than. But if it is less than, then that is when it stops. So and then we also have this transform translate vector3 left times 0 times time delta time. Time delta time is how much time has lapsed between frames. So if x is less than, then we multiply it by 0. That's also going to keep us at our max point. So let's see here. We also have the, let's see, we're not quite down to that yet. If input get key, is what I'm looking for. Sorry, I was looking at my notes. No, we already went over that because those are basically duplicates. We just changed the letter areas and some of the, just about all the values stayed the exact same. Okay, so if we go to void on collision, enter 2D, collision 2D other. Alright, so when collision occurs, it will store what collided with the object other. And 2 is lives minus equals 1. Essentially, if collider occurs, subtract 1 from lives. This is an adjustable value. Let's say we have 100 lives, but we want to subtract 5 for some reason. We could have set our lives to a much higher number, and maybe that would make more sense. We're not going to do it in this case, since -1 seems to represent the gameplay best. So you'll see we have another adjustable variable in a moment. We'll get there shortly. We have if lives is equal to 0, and we're going to basically trigger cleanup to remove the grimes and remove the acids. So that once the game ends, those will stop spawning essentially, and also just delete so that we don't have a bunch of wasted ones within the scene. Alright, and then time.timescale equals 0, that's going to end the game. Alright, so we've also got if other game object is equal to grime clone right below that. And then we've got controller.score, and this is an adjustable value. Let's make it harder to get a high score. So we'll set that to 20. Okay. That pretty much should explain itself just by going through that. It basically calls out the controller script. The if other game object.name is equal to grime clone basically gets a grime clone, and we need to test it if Spongy gets a grime clone, and so on. So we go down to the on GUI, and this is going to create the time score and lives boxes that you see in the top left corner of our game. We adjusted these values the way you suggested. If we wanted to make any adjustments, again, these values go X, then comma Y, then comma width, and then comma height. Alright, and beyond that, we want to display time, which calls minutes and seconds variables. The one moment here. So we'll look at the line with the modulus as well. Seconds equals integer time.time modulus 60, and then comma my style. So the my style we saw earlier, this is when the on GUI is actually going to refer to the beginning of our script. I don't want to waste too much time on it, but it's our second line of code, essentially public GUI style, my style. All right. Beyond that, we also have, let's see here. I'm not going to adjust these values just because I think that looks good for our goals, and I think that my explanation shows that if I know this basically would adjust location and scale. Alright, so we've got the private void. That's the removal grime private void. So we're going to look for grime objects. We're going to create a for loop that says if I is equal to 0, then I is less than the length, then add 1 to I. Alright. And we will also be destroying the game object if that, I believe, comes up true. So moving on from that line, we've got private void removal acid, and this will close out the spongy script. Game objects equals game object dot find game objects with tag. and that'll be acid for integer I equals 0. I is less than game object's length, high plus high. So we basically have the exact same script. We just replace grime with acid, and this will get rid of those two assets within our scene. So we move on to the controller script. It's very short. Public static class controller. We made sure to delete the mono behavior above and replace it with static in front of class. This allows us to get multiple objects to have access to this score. We want it to be public, not private, to be clear on that. So we'll go to the grime script. We've got essentially we're creating the new script grime and attaching grime to the variable rigid body 2D by saying public rigid body 2D grime. We then have public float speed equals -3 0.0 f referring to that being a float type value. We could adjust the speed of grime actually, and so we might as well. We've got -3. We are going to make it -5 since the game was a little bit easy. And I should have one of my trusty old adjustables right there. Alright, I'm going to save all before we continue on real quick. Okay, so we also have the void awake. Again, awake is different from start. Essentially, when something's triggered or enabled, it's going to begin instead of at the very beginning or the start of the game. So we've got invoke spawn grime, comma 2. So this is going to, I believe, be every 2 seconds. I'm on the wrong page, but from memory, I believe it's every 2 seconds. We will be, yeah, that's between each spawn, so it's a 2-second delay. So we're gonna make it more like 1. Alright, so now we'll have a lot more spawning at a faster rate. We also add the function spawn grime to void, and we do not need to add any parameters inside of this right here. In fact, not need, but do not want to at all. So we've got rigid body 2D is grime instance, so we're basically saying, hey, this is going to be a rigid body 2D that's going to help with colliding and falling. So then we've got the extremely long line of code, grime instance equals instantiate grime, comma new vector 3. I could go on. Essentially, we've got -6 and 6, which is an adjustable value. We could also change 7 so that I believe that's, yeah, so that's in the Y, and the 0 is for the Z axis. And X is the -6 and 6. So it's a XYZ parameter. Your video displays the value 7 or 6.5. I'm going to leave this as is because it works best for the size of our game background area that everything's stuck to. The 7 could be adjusted since it's the Y, but we'll just change that to 6 maybe to make things go a tiny bit faster. Okay, the 0, 0, 0 relates to rotation, so we're not going to adjust that for these. And let's see, void on collision 2D, collision 2D. So I'm at 19 minutes. I don't know how much else you want me to explain, except I'm going to point out the other areas that we can adjust really quickly. Okay, so if we go to the acid script, we again could adjust the speed from -3 to maybe -8. That's going to be very hard. Invoke speed, that's going to be the spawn, so 0.3, again increasing how hard the game is going to be. The set range is going to be the same that I described for the grime. That's the rotation again. We're not going to change that for this one. Let me see. Background on trigger. So we'll go to the background script or the bathroom. There we go. And I would not adjust too much here. We can adjust the line right here, controller score -20. Make that -50 to make it so we lose more points if we end up basically, yeah, anyway, that'll negate more points as we play. Okay, speeding this up just to make your life as a teacher easier, hopefully. You're okay with that. And I have displayed enough of an understanding of the code thus far. So just to make sure you understand, we've got these scripts attached. Spongy has the Spongy script, bathroom script has bathroom, controller script has the acid and grime script. The main camera does not have any of our scripts. If we go to prefabs, check acid, it's got the circle collider 2D, or that's not what I need to be displaying. We have the acid script. We also have plugged in the acid rigid body, and same situation for the grime. You can see the -3 right here. So let me say file, save all, and hopefully these will actually update in just a moment. Interesting. Okay. So if I say file, save, we're gonna play this again. Must exit play mode to save the scene. I see. I did not realize I still had play mode on. So let's go ahead and save all just in case I made any mistakes. Hopefully that doesn't delay this for both of us. Alright, save as. Save. We don't need to do that right now, just say save. Alright, let's go ahead and play the game. Let's see how much more difficult it is. I'm going to use Q and E, so that's working. It looks like we've got quite a few more spawns coming in. It might have been fun to actually make my speed a lot slower than it is. Interesting. Okay, so my score went way down. Let's check lives again to see that lives is set to 5. It is. The time is ticking normally. If I get that, I actually lost points. So I will adjust one of the score parameters, and that is interesting that that collider is actually stopping the other one. So I guess that's a collider between the sprites of the acid, which is quite interesting. So I'm actually losing a lot of points here. So I will stop the game, go back, controller score, we'll make that 20 again. We'll go to Spongy. No, let's see, controller, static int score, acid. None of that has to do with score. We've got invoke spawn, we've got float speed adjustable. There won't be any of that. -6. Let me check Spongy's. That's got to be the only other one that might have any relation to the score. Score equals 0. That's not going to be it. You see all my adjustable lines, which is nice to have these adjustable lines. Plus or minus equals 20. Interesting. So I believe I adjusted that one from the original value on collision enter 2D. So it'll take me a moment just to go back in my notes, but this is why it's so nice to have really clean notes that you can go back through. Lives, no. No. Okay, it might have just been that one score section right there. So let's go ahead and test it. File, save all, file, save. Let's play. Again, I'm using Q and E instead. My score seems to be staying at 0, -20, minus nothing. Interesting, -40. So my score is actually still going down. I believe I do know which line that is. So let's fix that. That seems to be important to show. So I'm looking at void on collision enter 2D plus or minus equals 20. So I need to find that line and see what the original value was. I believe that will solve our issue. Spongy part 3. I think it's in Spongy part 2. Minus equals 1. We've got that at the same value. Time scale, removal, lives. Controller score plus or minus equals 50. Alright, so let's save that. Save all. File, save. Let's play it. Q, QE, QE, QE. Interesting. My Q and E did not work. Let's try it again. There we go. Q and E are working. Sorry about that. So what's going on with our score? It looks like our score is in fact functioning the way it used to, except we're losing points the longer the time goes on instead of gaining points. So we would want to look at the time instantiating. I believe my adjustments throughout the video broke. I do believe the game was working exactly as written by you initially, if you want to go back and check that. But let me know if this was satisfactory or not, and if you want me to fix the adjustment of the time score going down as we continue on. I can prove that I can solve that, but let me know if that would help out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day.